Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know what leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Well, good evening, listeners. In our episode, Using Compassionate Communications in Conflict, our guest, Andy Friends, is a member of the core team of the San Antonio Peace Center, and he will share the work of the Peace Center as well as insights and the 4 key elements of compassionate communication. Andy will actually demonstrate these elements as well as tips and strategies for approaching conflicts from an empathetic perspective in this month of compassion. Now, who is Andy? Andy Friend started his career in the Peace Corps, working in Central America. After that, he worked in community development in Northern California, and he decided to become a certified life coach. For the past 5 years, he has shared compassionate communication with groups of social workers, psychologists, the U.S. military, teachers and students in Mexico and the U.S., giving conferences and workshops in English and Spanish. Currently, he's living in San Antonio with his wife and a Mexican therapist, and they are both involved in compassion, art, dance, and therapy activities in San Antonio. Now, we have a number of callers live that are showing up in our chat room, so we welcome you guests in our chat room. We encourage you to put your comments, your questions to Andy and us, and we'll bring that into the show. We also have our student intern who is using the hashtag TCCRadio on Twitter, so that is hashtag TCCRadio if you want to join us in the Twitter feed. And certainly if you want to join us live on the phone, call us at 347-324-3591, and we'll press the 1 key and we'll be happy to ask your comments or questions. So again, thank you guests for joining us. Andy, thank you and welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, absolutely. You know, we actually met in person, which is really nice because a lot of times I have guests that I don't have an opportunity to meet in person. So I'm glad that I got to not only meet you and your wife, but Rosalind with the San Antonio Peace Center and some other really wonderful folks who are doing things around compassion and helping San Antonio be a compassionate city. So tell me, what got you into compassionate communications?
Well, after I served in the Peace Corps, I was working in public health in Northern California, and during that time I was exploring and learning about different topics in personal development. So while I was doing that, I took a workshop for my own development and decided to become a life coach. So around that time that I was becoming a life coach, I was introduced by a coworker to compassionate communication or nonviolent communication. And once I learned about it, it just seemed to align so well with how I wanted to show up that I just kept wanting to devour more information, learn more about it. And then it wasn't very long before I started sharing it with others. And I began giving workshops probably within a year after being introduced to it. So I just started sharing it with others at that point.
But what connected you to that? I mean, what made that so powerful for you that you said, you know, I'm going to share this knowledge with other people?
So it's a good question. What I would say is that each of the different elements really help to kind of tease out the human experience and what makes things sometimes difficult about conflict. And it helped to separate out what's the felt experience with sort of separate it from sort of the confusion of sometimes how conflict can become confusing. And so it helped me to kind of divine out, this is what my experience is in my body or my feelings or what's important to me right now from how I usually would end up in conflict, which is with confusion or with judgments or diagnoses or what have you.
Okay, so very good. So just so that listeners understand what we really mean by compassionate communication, take a little bit of time to kind of define that. And you mentioned elements. So what are these elements in compassionate communication?
Yes. So the 4 elements are observations, feelings, needs, and requests. When I give a workshop, I kind of talk about what they are and what they aren't. And I will mention that there was a past podcast with Phil Schulman that goes a little bit more into detail with it. But basically, I kind of distinguish observations from judgments, feelings from thoughts, needs from strategies, and requests from demands. And it's kind of go into each one and what is this, what is it not, using examples usually when I do it. But the intention of compassionate, it's not just those 4 elements and sort of memorizing them. The intention is about focusing on needs, what's most important to each person in a given conflict, and then intending to help everybody meet their needs in that conflict. That's the broad intention, because some people will kind of get buried in the details of, I did an observation, that kind of thing. But it's really about how do I surface what's most important to each person and hold all of those things as important, as vital.
Now, when you speak as if in third person, meaning as a practitioner, as a neutral. So are we approaching it from that place? Or are we also talking from if a listener is in conflict themselves with another person, that we're also talking from that perspective as well, which is from ourselves?
Yes. In addition to that, so first of all, I could be in conflict with somebody else, and I am kind of getting in touch with my own feelings and needs, and then make an attempt to identify or question or ask the other person what their feelings and needs are before moving to action, before moving to a request. But also, there are conflicts. As you mentioned, there's conflicts where there's a person in the middle who's kind of helping each side to surface their needs, and that's helpful sometimes because if both people are just so mired in their own strategies or their own confusion or what have you, they may not be able to give each other or themselves any empathy. And that's kind of the ideal, is to have somebody there to kind of listen to each person. That doesn't always happen, obviously. But then the other piece actually is mediation within oneself. So I may have 2 decisions that I'm considering, and I want to sort of mediate out, these are the needs that would be met by this decision, and these are the needs. So there's intrapersonal conflict resolution as well.
Okay, so far we've talked about these 4 elements that are important to, especially, I would imagine, in observing in oneself is key to making sure that we have the capacity in doing it and providing compassionate communications with others. So did I make a right assumption about that it's key to start with ourselves, it would seem?
Yes, absolutely. Without having some sense of what one's own needs are, it makes it very difficult to really be present and open to hearing the needs of other people.
Okay, very good. Now, is there anything else that comes with the definition in general of compassionate communications that you want to mention now?
Yes. Another piece is sort of the direction, and I kind of hinted at it, but the direction that one would go. So there's empathy or compassion, and that's kind of the key this month, right? Empathy or compassion for oneself, sort of paying attention to and giving awareness and space to what's going on inside of oneself, what's going on inside of myself, and what's most important to me. And then there's empathy for the other, which is turning that that spotlight towards whoever I'm looking at or listening to or thinking about, that to say what might be going on for them, whether or not I can actually ask them or whether or not they'd be willing to tell me, is secondary, I think, or it's additional to. It is fairly primary, but sometimes it can't happen, But I can imagine in my head sometimes what could this person be feeling and needing if they're not right in front of me, and that is empathy. It can be considered empathy for that other person as well.
So you've said a couple of times, and I want to go a little bit deeper to make sure that listeners understand the phraseology I'm hearing you say is this felt experience, this felt sense or awareness of what is alive in somebody. What do you mean by felt experience or felt sense?
Yeah. So a lot of the time when we talk about how we feel, we use thought words. A lot of people do this, where they will say, maybe they even say, I felt like, or I felt as if this was happening. We use the word feel in a sense. And in compassionate communication, really we want to focus on what's going on in the body. So when I say I feel, I want to share the feeling. So I may feel a sense of frustration, or I may feel a sense of anger, or I may feel sadness, confusion. Those are all feelings by the compassionate communication definition. And that helps. The reason why I want to look at what's going on emotion-wise or in my body, I may even feel just tension in my shoulders, or I may feel tension in my lower back. Those kinds of things are also included in terms of the felt sense. The reason why I want to focus on that is because it helps to, A, get in touch with my own body and become more present with myself, and B, it also helps to move away from blame or judgment language. So the last thing I want to do when I'm being in this sort of mindset is let another person know that the experience that I'm going through is their fault, or transmit in some way blame to them, because it makes it much less likely to have the kind of quality of connection with them that I want. If I take full responsibility, my feelings are caused by my own needs that are met or unmet. That makes it much more likely that the other person is going to be willing to listen to me with an empathic ear as well.
Okay, very good. So we're going to come back to having you talk about the San Antonio Peace Center in just a minute, because I think it's important to understand, what they're doing that taps into this compassion and empathy. But let's continue on this vein that we're on. You, if you wouldn't mind, kind of describe what you would do in a compassionate communication. Can you kind of walk us through what someone might do first if they're going to use compassionate communication?
Okay. So first of all, I guess it would depend on if somebody's never done it before or not. If they've done it before, sometimes they can go right into what feelings they have. And if they haven't done it before, usually they would need a little bit of coaching maybe, because and that's been my experience in many workshops. Most people's sort of default reaction is around thoughts and diagnoses and judgments about what this other person is, or what they are trying to do, or what have you. And so what I would like to do, what my intention would be, I'm faced with some sort of issue where there's a disagreement maybe, or I'm not on the same page with somebody, let's say. That's usually identified fairly easily because it's not pleasant. I mean, you can also use compassionate communication in situations where people, celebrate and are on the same page and enjoy each other's presence. That's also a use of you can apply compassionate communication and get more of a depth of experience in that as well. But most of the time, people approach this because they're having conflicts and they're not enjoying what's going on with the relationship.
So I want to underscore what you just said to make sure people heard that and that I heard that. So that compassionate communication is not just equated to a negative experience or a conflict that's happening, but it could be something that's celebratory, something to, a success, a positive experience. So it's that on both ends of the spectrums. Is that what I heard?
Yes. Exactly.
Okay, excellent. Okay, great.
So, what initially attract people usually don't go to the celebration workshops first. They go because they're having something they want something to have a better quality of relationship, and so we start off usually with some sort of issue that's going on, and I actually usually like to think of it makes it a little easier for me when I do this in all my workshops where I kind of think of a live issue or a personal issue that I have, and I go kind of applying it. So are you okay with me kind of moving in that direction with it?
Sure.
Okay. So this isn't one specific one because there's so many that I can, but basically I may be, I'm speaking my relationship with my wife, and I did get her permission ahead of time.
Thank God.
Yeah. And I made it something where it's kind of me being the one who's doing something that isn't working. It makes it a little easier to.
So you're in the doghouse.
I'm the bad guy, right? So
you're in the doghouse. Okay.
So usually I've noticed something that it can be relatively innocent, like a cup. Let's just use an example of a glass that's been sitting on a table for longer than I would enjoy. Because I'm the cleaner. I'm a little bit more obsessive in that sense, and so that's my judgment. I admit it. So I noticed the glass. That's the observation. Glass is sitting on a table. Glass has been sitting on a table for 3 hours. I'm getting a little itchy, something like that. So what I'll do is ideally go to my strategy that doesn't work first. So I'll usually say, I might raise my voice and say, why isn't that glass in the sink? Something like that. And so me saying that did not communicate to my wife in a compassionate way what was going on for me and what I needed. I kind of first what I did was I asked a question that really wasn't probably what I was needing to know. And then afterwards, as I realized that probably wasn't working, then I'll look back and I'll say, okay, let's press rewind and try something different. Seeing that glass, and this is something I've done as well, where I've started off the conversation like this. I'm noticing the glass there. It's been there for a while. Maybe it's been there for a few hours. I'm getting a little antsy. That's my feeling that's going on. I'm getting a little itchy or antsy because I kind of have a need for order. I have order is really important to me. Would you be willing? This is the request part. Would you be willing to take that glass to the sink? And saying that a little bit more, like I'm saying it, versus raising my voice. Then that makes it much more likely, and I've seen kind of the ease that can sometimes create. Makes it more likely for my wife to really want to do it, and not. And so the other end of it is if my wife hears a demand, the two choices she has are submit or rebel, as they say. So she can either do it and kind of grit her teeth, and then. Or rebel and be like, no, we had to do that.
So typically, most people, unless they're really, practicing this and consciously aware of this, go to the make an observation, a judgment. They take a strategy, which is usually some type of a demand. It's usually some type of a blame or accusation, and then the strategy is usually, this or this. Like you said, they either, rebut or resist. So when you practice this with your wife in this situation, what did you notice was the impact on how she responded to you?
I would say that I've had times when she's come back to me with strong emotions, expressing some negative, some needs not met, and those are around care and respect, needs for care and respect that aren't met with the way that I'm approaching things when it's the first way. And then when it's the second way, things just frequently, things will flow a lot more easily. And I just, shining like the sign with the lights on it in my head right now has a need for ease. Ease is coming up for me right now when I do that more. We don't even have to think about it sometimes. If I'm kind of just stating something and I've kind of given myself some empathy, so that I can just ask for something. And the other thing about a request also is being open to, the response. Because if I make a request, it's not guaranteed that she's going to say yes. She may not. It's not. She may need to do something else first, or it may not meet certain needs for her to say yes. And so part of the compassion, being compassionate, is being open to whatever the answer is to the request. Because sometimes my strategy of, can you pick this up and take this to the sink right now, is not the strategy that she's really open to also. So
so it's like continuing that compassionate communication beyond the request, because it's whatever she is going to respond or react to, and how do you continue that thread of compassion and empathy through the conversation is what I hear is also continues to be important.
Yes. It's at the end with the request. Yes.
Absolutely. So listeners, we're just a little bit, beyond the halfway point, and so you are tuned into the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk Radio program. I'm your host, Patty Porter, and we're talking with Andy Friend here in San Antonio about using compassionate communications when we're in conflict. And he's also representing the San Antonio Peace Center. So why don't we take a little bit of time to talk about what your connection is to the San Antonio Peace Center, and what is their vision? We'll talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to come back to the compassion conversation itself. So tell us a little bit about that connection you have to them.
Okay. Well, I've been a member of I've been one of the volunteers at the Peace Center for, I want to say, around a year. Not very long relative to the length of time they've been around, but they're an all-volunteer organization, and we like to say we're catalysts for community, for compassionate growth. And so I think everybody really likes the catalyst word in the group, but yeah, we serve as a catalyst for compassionate action.
Okay.
As far as the vision, I mean, there are some activities that some of the members directly facilitate, like a book study group on the 12 Steps for a Compassionate Life by Karen Armstrong. And there are some, probably many more events that we promote and facilitate that other agencies, groups, organizations in town are doing themselves. So it's just about creating, knowledge of different kinds of events and facilitating some of them ourselves. Excuse me.
Clarify, what was the book that Karen Armstrong wrote?
12 Steps.
Based on her work of what now?
12 Steps to a Compassionate Life.
Okay,
good.
Right? All right.
Cool.
Yes. To a compassionate life. Now, it's my understanding that the San Antonio Peace Center is involved. One of their visions is to help San Antonio be a more compassionate city. And so I assume that's that connection to being a catalyst for, compassionate growth or action. Are there a couple of recent successes or events that have led to, supporting that mission for them?
Yes. We actually, there's sort of ongoing events that under the guise or under the name of the Pilgrimage of Compassion, which last year about 22 events were coordinated with over 3,000 people in attendance. And it actually looks like, I don't know how many I haven't counted for this year, but it looks like it's going to go to that number or higher for the number of events we're sort of supporting this year. So the Pilgrimage of Compassion is a variety of different events at in different organizations, and we're just sort of a central place where we can, promote it, get the word out, invite people, that kind of thing. We also have an ongoing Compassionate Action Nights at the Oblate School of Theology, and that's where people are sort of discussing and putting kind of the rubber to the road as far as, what we would like to see happening in San Antonio, but then also, people in those groups are taking action in different ways to bring more, more organizations on board that are formally endorsing compassion, and also making the city of San Antonio sort of designating it as a compassionate city under the Charter for Compassion.
So now, for those who are interested in understanding more about what's specifically going on in our city, and this is not the only city that is aiming to have a compassionate city, but folks can go to www.sacompassionnet.org to look up more about what our city is doing to help be a more compassionate city. Anything else you want to say about the Peace Center before we go back to our conversation on compassion and empathy?
One additional thing, I think, my experience with the leaders at the Peace Center has been such an enjoyable experience, because they bring that sense of, it's like, you can have somebody who wants to send a message out there, and then they don't necessarily practice it. When we get together as a group and we're practicing compassion, we're practicing compassion. We're practicing care for each other. And that's what really caught my attention when I first met up with them. That I really enjoyed engaging in this effort and having this care for each other while we were kind of organizing different things and coordinating different things. It was just really enjoyable. I wanted to send a shout out.
Well, that's great, because I think they're doing really important work, and it's wonderful that you were willing to come on the program to talk a little bit about what they're doing, and also, what compassion is. And so as we start to kind of wind down a little bit on our show, there's definitely a couple of things I wanted to touch base. Obviously, practice is really important in having empathetic and compassionate conversation, especially when we're in conflict. As you mentioned earlier, really to underscore that we use compassion conversation not just for all the negative things, but the positive, but it's when we're in conflict, where our ability to communicate, to be tapped in, to be confused, to not be really clear about this felt experience, as you talked about, I would imagine that we would really need to be consciously practicing. Anything more you wanted to say about kind of practicing? And then I'm going to ask you about some strategies or tips in particular.
Well, this might fall under strategy, and it just came to me as you were asking the question, and it's around kind of providing care for ourselves while we're engaged in this process. So if somebody out there were to say, I'd really like to try to start this, and then they haven't done a whole lot of practice on on being compassionate for others in conflict, and then as is it's a tendency there to still have the pathways in the brain that have been well traveled, where you have a certain habit that you've always done. As is the tendency, people will still go back to a previous habit and yell at their child, for instance, or yell at their spouse instead of kind of explaining something out with, using feelings and needs language. There's going to be, I guess I'm just giving an invitation to remind people to care have some care for themselves and some compassion for themselves when they inevitably it's likely, I'm not gonna doom anybody to failure or anything, but usually when you have certain habits, it's a process that takes time to bring new habits in. And the question I always ask people is kind of, would you rather keep doing it the way you've been doing it? How well has that been working for you? And would you like to consider this, this other way of doing things? And at the same time, as you're kind of stumbling and kind of, I guess, like the Chinese saying of falling 99 times and getting up 100, have some care and some compassion for yourself as you're engaging in this process.
I'm glad you brought up this, thing about this element, very important element about providing care to ourselves, about being compassionate and empathetic to ourselves. And I was just talking to a client today who is probably one of the most caring, supportive, loving, compassionate, empathetic to others. And the thing that got her stuck was not being compassionate toward herself. And that was really getting her stuck in her conflict. And we talked about that level of being able to forgive and to be compassionate and empathetic. And she never thought of that, of doing that for herself. And so it was somewhat of a breakthrough for her about allowing herself to be, to really be cared for and to forgive so we talked about what those elements meant for her that was keeping her from being stuck. What is one other strategy that you want to share with listeners that they can implement like right now?
So I would say that for somebody who maybe doesn't have a whole lot of practice with it, sometimes pressing pause in a conversation, just asking for permission to kind of hold on a second, can you give me a minute, versus feeling some, pull or some urge to answer a person's, urgent request right away. So let's say there's somebody raises their voice at you and says, I need you to do this right now. Maybe they say it really fast. That also tends to get people wanting to respond really fast. And so kind of giving yourself the permission to press pause and to, and or if you're able to, if there's a space there for it, to say, could I just run to the restroom real quick? That's another. I need to go to the restroom, and giving yourself that space sometimes to choose your response versus kind of demanding shooting ourselves into answering something right away in a way that maybe isn't as enjoyable.
So I like that, being able to press pause, being able to care for yourself by showing compassion, empathy to yourself, and as we mentioned earlier, really practicing. I think you even said at one point in an earlier conversation about, how do we practice our empathy muscle, and by doing that, a lot of times practicing these types of skills is doing it when you're not in conflict, so that when you are in conflict, you won't be like deer in the headlights, like, what was that? It was observation. No, strategy. No, I think it was neat. So you're already having that instilled in your mind and in your body about what it means to practice and using opportunities and positive opportunities to practice that, compassion, empathy muscle. So now people need help with this because you said, if they're not used to doing this is one of the things that you do life coaching on, is my understanding. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can people reach you if they want to do some life coaching around this?
They could email me to afriendlifecoach@gmail.com. So and then all one word. Friend is my last name, FRIEND, lifecoach@gmail.com.
And were you going to say something, Andy, about you being a life coach? I think I cut you off. Were you going to say something about that?
Oh, that I've done. I would say that more recently I've done more workshops and conferences with groups versus doing one-on-one coaching. But I would be thrilled to be able to do to get back into some more one-on-one coaching with people around conflict resolution as well. So when you said it, I had a moment of like, well, I wanted to almost clarify, like, you know, it's not like I have several individual clients that I work with every day right now, just wanting to be, you know, transparent about it.
Okay, so it sounds like not only are you open to taking a one-on-one client, give you some opportunity to do some great work, but that you continue to do these workshops on compassion and empathy, and I want to make sure people understand that they can reach out to you certainly for that. Now, we mentioned a couple of resources. Again, listeners, the San Antonio CompassionNet.org is refers to the San Antonio Peace Center and the work they're doing and vision around helping San Antonio be a compassionate city. And also another website that's a great resource that Andy provided is all on the show pages as well, but it's the Center for Nonviolent Communication, and their website is www.C for center, N for non, V for violence, C for communication.org. So C, N, V like in violence, C like in communication.org are two additional resources. And again, all of this is on the TexasConflictCoach.com radio page that has all the information of Andy, these additional resources. So, Andy, as we close out, what final message and assignment for the week that you would like to leave with our listeners?
Yes. So nobody can deny that it's difficult to respond with compassion in a difficult situation. I would invite everyone who's listening now and those even who listen to the recording afterwards to take a baby step in the direction of practicing more compassion. So if that means, you know, restraining yourself once in various arguments or fights during the day, you know, maybe you were able to restrain yourself one time, or deciding not to engage someone, then you go ahead and give that a try if you're open to it. If you already have some form of compassionate practice and it means to extend it out a little or practice a little more, feel free to give that a try as well. So the key is to try to stretch yourself in your growth in whatever way you feel could be valuable. And also I would extend the invitation to feel free to email me if you did stretch yourself and you either have something to celebrate or to mourn. So maybe you tried to stretch yourself and you didn't enjoy it as much as you would have liked. You want some support on that or to be heard on it. And but I'd love to hear from people's experiences if people would like to email me with experiences they've had around trying to stretch themselves, take a baby step.
Okay, very good. So listeners, you have your call to action. We encourage you to reach out to Andy or certainly to post on the Texas Conflict Coach Facebook page. There's so many ways that you can connect to us. I want to thank all of our guests that showed up in the chat room and the Twitter feed. And thank you so much, Andy, for being part of our program and educating our audience.
Thank you. I had a good time. I really enjoyed being on the show with you, Patty. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome, Andy. All right, good night, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at TexasConflictCoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.